But whenever I astral punched, it never came from my head. It came from my hands. Power Girl can punch the astral plane. Superboy Prime Bar, look out, because Paige is coming for his thing. A lot has happened with Power Girl over these last few months, time for recording, and we're gonna take a look at some of it. It's left her in potentially an interesting place, but also potentially in a mess. And her backup series, and particularly the special leading up to her new status quo and solo series, is pretty rough. We're not necessarily talking solely in terms of characterization, which varies, and some may enjoy the new portrayal and some of the different directions that she's being taken in, but we're also talking in terms of the very structure of the stories themselves. The narrative flow, the use of comic conventions such as narrative boxes and paneling, and just the base way in which information and details are conveyed and the way that the art marries with the text. We're gonna hone in on the special because it's the longest example of this version of Power Girl as presented by Leah Williams, who's writing, and Marguerite Sauvage on art. So you can most concretely see the strengths and weaknesses here in this special. But of course we'll refer back to the other issues as necessary. Why will we examine this when some feel that in a few months or years time it won't matter and none of it will be referenced, or maybe it will, we'll have to see? Well, because I think it's interesting. And I think and hope you will too. If not, and this doesn't sound up your alley, it's time to get out now. You've been forewarned. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and it's always a good day to talk about Power Girl. Now, this video was originally going to be about the name change, but by the time I had caught up with the Action Comics backups, it was nearly time for the special. So I figured, why not wait? But before we get to it, let's do a quick catch-up. Power Girl's adventures were initially housed in Action Comics as a backup. This after this version of her and the direction for her story debuted in a Lazarus Planet tie-in. We talk about Power Girl a lot in this channel. We have a playlist. So if anything's glossed over here, it's likely because we already talked about it, and if that happens, I'll refer you back to that vid. We did a video about the slightly confusing status of Power Girl post-rebirth and how there were some questions as to which Power Girl this is. Who is this Power Girl? As in post-Crisis versus New 52 or a fusion because of the Omniverse. We'll link to that below because these questions are gonna keep coming up, and this issue isn't really gonna solidify things. In fact, in some ways, by answering the question, it leans into the fact that this may not be the best characterization for the character. Now, leading up to this series and this special, Power Girl was active during Dark Crisis. She ended up on Damian Wayne's Breakoff Squad, and then later on still was with him when they dealt with Lazarus Planet, the start of it in Alpha. Lazarus Planet was an event, but it ended up being more like a shake-up, just a little bit of changes sprinkled around the status quo. There was an Alpha and a Mega, and then a bunch of tie-ins, and a lot of new characters and new power sets were introduced, because what happened was there was Lazarus Resin resulting in Lazarus rain down upon the people, and so power sets were changed. Now, since these tie-ins / this event, these have been referenced sporadically. It varies. Some people are leaning into it, some people really aren't. In January of 2023, in Lazarus Planet Assault on Krypton, we got our first dip into this new set of Power Girl stories. In a very dreamy, kind of trippy story, Power Girl floats through the astral plane and her own insecurities until she connects with Omen and manages to punch her way out to reality. But she discovers that not only does she have a psychic connection, but she also has her own psychic powers. Now, even in this early starter story, there were some warning signs. Some of the connections and explanations were loose. How did Power Girl get to the astral plane? However, given that it was Lazarus Planet and it appeared in a tie-in, some of those threads could be filled in through osmosis or by the circumstance or proximity to the rest of the stories inside that narrative. And also, some of the questions, it seemed like they could be answered later. But it was a warning sign that when it came to concrete explanations, there may potentially be some issues. The Power Girl in play appeared to be the one brought back into existence post-Doomsday Clock, who seemed to be the post-Infinite Crisis version of the character, which would mean that also the post-Crisis on Infinite Earth and those changes would be in play. So we'd be dealing with all of that, including the Aryan backstory, Atlantis, and different things that this character has gone through. It's been quite the journey. She has quite the history. But not all of the characterizations seem to match up, and the one that was being given to her here didn't seem to be pulling really from any of those eras specifically. Instead, it was making reference to early moments and then expanding upon them from an emotional level without fully connecting to the history that had been laid down in other books or prior works. This Power Girl was more fish out of water, not understanding phrases and the like, but that wouldn't match with a Power Girl who had left her ship, which had raised her, yes, but she had spent years on Earth and with the JSA and had forged strong connections with other heroes and even been a CEO. And the fact that she was a CEO was later referenced in the Action Comics 1053 backup story. So that appears to be in play. You'll keep getting little references and nods to these past moments. But then that makes the whole, what's going on? What are these Earth expressions? I'm channeling Teen Titans Go Starfire moments seem a bit more out of place. It feels as though some of those moments are played more for comedy than for authenticity to the character. And if this is meant to be the new characterization, then some of the backstory should perhaps be tweaked, or some of the references need a bit more context. Or perhaps it would be better if some references were just left alone. But we're rushing ahead. After After the Lazarus Planet teaser, Power Girl and Omen were in a backup series in Action Comics starting from issue 1051 and ending in issue 1053. So admittedly, not a long time. Leah Williams was interviewed early on about the direction that the series was going and what the main premise would be. And the hook, as described, was basically Power Girl as a therapist, but a therapist who goes into your head and punches your trauma in the face. She stated, she is a psychic who now has teamed up with somebody who can physically punch her way into somebody's mindscape and then battle their inner demons. So trauma, dealing with trauma, confronting it, acknowledging it, finding where it's put down roots in you is a big theme. Having read all these issues now, time of recording and being caught up, that's not a theme, that is exactly what happens. She has 3 issues, each dealing with a different character whose mindscape she goes into. As the issues go on, a psychic attack element is introduced with people close to Power Girl being targeted even though they're not actually people close to Power Girl really. A lot of it is very tell and don't show on the emotional trauma part, but there is some clever artwork with the background and the representative kind of work. This in terms of the trauma or the ways that people's minds are interpreting things, that can be quite interesting. But the art and the words don't always fully marry, or they're not entirely working in tandem, because if one were to take the words out entirely, it would be difficult to follow what was going on without them. What one came up with may not be what was being attempted to be conveyed. The way people talk about their trauma is very on the nose, and on the surface appears deep, but upon further reading can be a very surface level way of looking at things, or trite and full of cliches. Which is not to say that it won't resonate or that it can't pack an emotional punch, but it appears to be going for more of a level of profundity than it's actually inherent. But that may have been the goal of the series. It may not have been meant to be a deep introspective work, but for that to be the case, then it does have a lot of deep introspective or meant to be scenes. Acute trauma comes from experiencing a singular isolated incident for which the brain has no answer, such as a traumatic brain injury after being shot in the head at close range. Omen, that's it. This is a coding problem. The genetic code linking Beast Boy to the Red may have gotten mixed up when he was shot, which could partially explain why he's been stuck in calf form. I need to locate where the code error is and fix it, but his subconscious keeps fighting me. So his genetic code can be fixed by altering something in his mindscape. Okay. Hey buddy, can you show me where it hurts? It's okay. It's okay. I know it's scary to go to the painful place, but Deathstroke's not gonna get you. I won't let him. After all these moments, also, we don't see the subjects again. It's very much treated as though this was the breakthrough moment, and I guess they got better. You do see the Superfamily again, but in a different non-therapy context. So for anyone hoping for a more serious or at least comprehensive look at the therapy process, this is more of an idealized fantasy look at therapy, which for some will land and for others won't. Now, as for Power Girl, if you've read a lot of her, she feels slightly off. Let me give you some Power Girl samples as she stands in this series. Here's from 1052, the Supergirl therapy issue. I like choked there. It's like, ugh. Oh, it's you. What, you're not even gonna say hello? I know we're not exactly close, but that's fairly rude by any metric, family or not. But then Kara can only speak Kryptonian? You can't say hello? Well, all mindscapes are different, right? Each one unique to its bearer, so you must think pretty highly of yourself, huh? The perfect sister, the perfect hero, the perfect keeper of Kryptonian tradition, the perfect representative of a fallen world. I don't think like that. No, you just work really hard at making sure other people do. And you know how I know all that? Because I've only ever been the imperfect you. That's an interesting interpretation of the Power Girl Supergirl dynamic, or the way that Power Girl would perceive it, that is not drawing upon any of their past interactions. Kara's tone, it's not quite right. It's slightly off from her usual shade of brash or confident or sassy. She just reads a bit like someone else. Not like a bad character, but just like a slightly different one. And how much that rankles is going to vary, or how much it's noticed is also going to vary depending upon how familiar one is with Power Girl, or there is also the potential that one could prefer this interpretation. And what she's expressing could line up with something that Power Girl or a version of her could feel, but it doesn't match for their history where she was before this point. It's very much like taking her back to basics and then applying a more self-pitying, self-doubting, self-loathing approach. This one's playing a lot more with survivor's guilt, making her look negatively at herself, which again can be interesting, but feels jarring if one is familiar with all those years of character history, which, as mentioned earlier, this comic sometimes references and then will at times dismiss. It has a bit of a flippant tone at times when it comes to some of her past. This comes up, for example, in 1053 in John's session, which is also the session where he ends up giving her new name. And don't call me Karen, it's not even my name. That was just a code name I used for an alter ego that no longer exists. So we're acknowledging that all of that happened, but also just tossing it out at the same time. Like, oh, don't even think about it, it doesn't matter. My name for decades, throw it out. So what's your actual name? Don't have one. Seriously? Call me Kara, beta version. That's not funny. Wasn't supposed to be. I call her PJ, or Paige for short. That's cute, Omen. I'll do the same. I think I found the source code. There's a pointer error down here. I mean, could be a pointer error. That points to the gates of hell, but hey, PJ, I was thinking. Paige kind of sounds like Paige. It does, not how I'm saying it. And Paige is a really pretty name. It sounds like a books page starting fresh with a brand new slate on your story's first blank page 1. So maybe that's your name, your Paige. That sound good, cuz? Why did they zoom up on his mouth like that? Just why? Why? Just the entire energy of that exchange. Although some are enjoying seeing her become closer to the Superfamily and her being integrated more in that way. Even though she did have a family unit that she was integrated with, it was the JSA and those characters. Even though I can see her seeking out this Superfam to replace her relationship with Earth 2 Kal-El. The question here is, why overtly reference part of her history just to dismiss it? Was it solely to bring up the fact that they want to call her by a different name? Because that could have been done either without referencing that error or without referencing it so dismissively. Even if we were actually related and I wasn't just a different version of Kara from Earth 2, it's not like any of you include me in anything anyway. Power Girl had a rich life and her own history completely separate from Supergirl. This idea that she's just some inferior knockoff version, it could be read as a bit insulting to the character herself. Or it could come across as an interesting inferiority complex that could be something that could be mine and something that she could feel. But again, it's really going to depend how and when you're coming to the character. Also, the way that the name is derived is the essence of telling and not showing. It's not the worst name or the worst reasoning or the worst explanation. It's the execution. It's very clunky and on the nose. Paige sounds like a page out of a book, so I should call you Paige because you're starting a new page in your book of life. Also, for a character like Power Girl who is so assertive and dominant, just kind of passively let somebody else name her is odd. Not that she wouldn't take a suggestion, but just have her not even be very enthusiastic about it. She just kind of thinks it's cute. But then by next issue, which is part of why I was waiting for the special, it's fully integrated. Other people are calling her it. Johnny Sorrow, the villain, is calling her it as if she's been called it for years. Someone in the comments did a very good comparative process of the reasoning of how this name was arrived upon and how it sounds clunky. And so I thought I would read it because it's a very good example of what's going on. Shout out to Adam, who's a frequent commenter. I feel like this is like some commenters here going, yeah, I don't like the name Sasha. Let's see her screen name initials are CC. Aha, let's call her CC. Why change from Karen? Was it actually because of the meme? I joked about that, but it was a joke. I don't know if that's actually why. If it was, that would be a shame. Was it to make a unique stamp on the character? Was it part of to help with the new direction, the new feeling the character has? Was it to make a subtle Karen Paige joke? Leah Williams is a lot of comedy work, so sometimes there'll be jokes sprinkled throughout and there can be different layers of it, even if she favors more brash outings of comedy sometimes, but there's many different types that can appear in her comics. Now, Leah Williams has talked about how Power Girl is becoming an ongoing series with much excitement, and she did briefly address the name change while discussing it in an interview with CBR. She stated, while correcting the interviewer for using the name Karen Starr, the name that the character has been known by for decades, she stated, also, it's not Karen Starr anymore. That's a name for a human alias that don't exist anymore after she sold off Star Enterprises, so she's going by Paige now. It's a name that John Kent came up with, a kind of nod to how Omens? Is that a typo or a nickname? Abbreviated nickname for Power Girl is PG or Paige. The debut of her new human alter ego happens in the first issue of the ongoing series. So guys, get ready for Paige, and for people who don't keep up to be confused, it's been Karen for a long time. Now quickly before the special, just a couple more things. The way what they're doing is talked about in these is that there's an error in these people's code, their source code, and that this code is being placed there by a supervillain as some kind of psychic attack to lure out Power Girl for reasons. And the code causes changes that are tied to the trauma, which sounds like computer speak, but my DC-dialed mind of course led me to the source wall. This was the barrier surrounding the multiverse. It's been weakened in recent canons, so keep that in your mindscape. Source wall, something that is important to the multiverse, the DC universe. I smacked my hand. Source wall, I hit it. Also, Omen discusses these as permanent fixes, as if you can just go in and beep boop, pull out a little piece, and then trauma solved. I've located the problem. It's rooted very, very deep. I'm sorry, but it seems like these attacks are escalating, becoming more aggressive and invasive. It actually begins here. John, with your consent, I'm going to telepathically induce a deep sleep for you so that you won't feel the pain of Power Girl removing the source code. So since these are telepathic attacks, are they inducing the trauma, exacerbating it? How? It's not entirely clear because it said these attacks are to get to Power Girl, but the first person used was Beast Boy. It's interesting, but there are some loose threads. It feels like it very much evolved as the story went along, which happens all the time, but in this case, the threads aren't fully pulled together. Think of this like rebooting your mind in safe mode. When you wake up, you'll be all better. Have you tried turning your brain off and on? That might fix it. Also, Omen hasn't had too much to do, really, in this series. She feels very much like a supportive best friend trope, but also a plot device because she provides valuable exposition establishing and has abilities to move the plot forward. However, there were things here that led up into the special that worked. The idea itself was interesting, as were some of the ways characters were interpreted, largely John because he's the newest, so there's the most room there. Although again, they managed to avoid all those years of volcano trauma for the most part. But the idea of how he processed language was intriguing. It laid the groundwork for how an actual series about this kind of going into people's minds a la Cell could have been very interesting, but perhaps these just weren't the best characters to use for it. The seeding of Johnny Sorrow, emerging from the subtle realms, was, dare I say, subtle. I wore an ode to it today. Just little bits of him breaking through. It was well done. It could have used more time, but that's most likely not something the creative team was necessarily given. The art is a point of contention. Some find it emotive and captivating, others find it uncanny and difficult to follow. For me, it has moments where it's all of the above, and it certainly gives the series a distinct feel. But there are nice little notes in the character modeling, like how when Power Girl goes into a fight stance, she goes into a boxing stance, which is kind of a reference to her training with Wildcat. Or perhaps it is, and I'm just reading into it. But again, that part of her history is largely ignored, and instead the focus is more on being excluded from this prime Earth superfamily. Okay, with all that said, it's special time. Johnny Sorrow time. Johnny Sorrow is kind of a big deal, and yet he's not used all that often, but that may be a good thing. You don't want to be the Joker. Johnny Sorrow is a character who I would be unsurprised if not everyone has heard of him. He's a JSA villain who crops up in the post-Zero Hour time frame, who became a criminal after his film career dried up. This during the conversion of silent film to talkie. So he's a bit melodramatic and should probably start a club with Basil Carlo. He ended up with his body being destroyed and being sent to the subtle realms. This courtesy of the Sandman, Wesley Dodd's sidekick, Sandy. Once there, Johnny Sorrow was reconstituted into something horrific by the King of Tears. He has a whole Medusa-esque you can't look upon his true face kind of thing going on. He has a mask that looks like a theater mask that he's wearing there. Sometimes it looks like there's stuff behind his head, sometimes it doesn't. He tends to be a bigger deal power-wise. At one point they had to pull out the Spectre to defeat him, but he also has uncomfortable plots like trying to make Stargirl fall in love with him, which is referenced by Power Girl in this. So she's familiar with him, but she doesn't really act that way. This also means that the continuity she is referencing is the post-Crisis one and not the New 52 one, because Johnny has a different origin there. Although you could keep his new origin and still do the Stargirl story and you could kind of fuse things. Now all this may sound kind of tiresome and pedantic and why bother, why bring it up? But if you're going to have your character reference events from specific eras and timelines, then which version you're working with becomes more relevant and should be made clear. Also, just making it clear when and where your character is situated and what their history is makes for a stronger story and a stronger universe overall. It's a win-win and can even expand the ideas and fan theories and different ways you can go about things. It's exciting. That's one look. The other way is that it's an albatross around one's neck. Just jettison the whole thing. No canon. Just tell the stories one wants to tell. Pull the things one wants to pull. That's kind of what the Omniverse method was billed as, actually. Some things are canon, some things aren't. All the things you need to be are canon, all the things you don't want to be aren't. That was kind of the way it was presented, which sounds good in theory, and it's much more difficult to achieve anything meaningful with in practice. Okay, so the special plot. Johnny Sorrows pulls the subtle realms into reality and also briefly traps Power Girl in his mindscape. There are some amusing jokes in here. The fake perfume ad is a highlight. Introducing Sorrow, the new fragrance from Johnny Sorrow. Sorrow, because you don't need a face to turn heads. We're gonna speed run the plot because if not, this is gonna turn to one of those 2-hour-long bread tube videos or some kind of commentary video about some kind of gate on TikTok. Tattoo gate, cake gate. Johnny Sorrow has locked Metropolis in his shared psychic vision, and he's dispatched 4 horsemen from the subtle realms to start taking over the world. And for some reason he sent them to Gotham, North Carolina, Los Angeles, and Seattle. So what do you say? Anticlimactic last words, my darling co-star. Yeah, eat Hey, that was an in-character feeling Power Girl moment. The color work in these is lovely, even if the paneling can get wonky. But at the same time, it's a very bright coloration, even in the more dim and dull moments. And as a result, sometimes that doesn't entirely match with some of the darker, more melancholic feeling moments. It's all very bright and cheerful, which is beautiful to look at, but at times doesn't fully seem to match the emotional tone. Also, the lack of backgrounds at times coupled with the lack of narration boxes can make it unclear where some battles are taking place or what realm they are in. So that's some extra legwork for the reader at times, but not necessarily in a rewarding and enhancing way, but a lack of necessary details way. A lot of this veers away from the traditional comic art style, so it's not gonna land for everyone. Now the rest of the issue is Power Girl and Omen looking for a way to break Sorrow's psychic hold over everyone, dispatch the 4 horsemen, and Power Girl deals with a bunch of things. She deals with her feelings of survivor's guilt and inadequacy, and they redefine what her new powers are. And at the end of the day, they succeed. She has a moment with all of the Superfamily, and then she goes off to do her own thing. Okay, now let's break all this down. This issue feels like there are lots of gaps in explanations and reasonings. Well, yeah, because this is all my fault, Lilith. People are hurt, potentially dying because of me. if I hadn't activated the trap, if I hadn't made a target for myself for Johnny to track. What? How did he become aware of her psychic power? What is the link between telepathy and the astral plane, or the astral plane and the multiverse? There is a lack of detail around something like this, which is a core element of how exactly her powers are functioning in this universe, which is something that will go on to define future stories, but there's excruciating detail given to something like how and why she's changing her name. One of the things that is left very unclear is how these powers work. Or not necessarily unclear, but it gets difficult and convoluted to follow. Here are some explanations. The Lazarus reigns changed me. In a single instant, I was inundated with an unholy deluge of astral data, a psychic stream of information that never ceases, that I never asked for and which I have yet to master. Luckily, I have other talents to fall back on. Also, this is an example here in this section, just quickly, of confusing paneling, because this glass breaking effect has been used multiple times in the issues to break into the astral plane, but here it's just her pushing him out of a window, but that's not made explicitly clear, so one could conceivably become confused. Is one going to? Maybe, but the potentiality is there and it's not addressed. Back to her powers. It's the astral punching that was the trick. It breaks illusions. The horsemen were an alternate reality I could shatter through. First, Omen telepathically deactivated sound receptors in every single brain of the crowd trapped within the poet's musical thrall. And then Owen telepathically deactivated the poet. Why couldn't she do that before? Why did you have to astral punch them? How were they an alternate reality? So is it an astrophysical mindscape you're punching into, or an actual alternate reality? Because that matters. And there's one thing still bothering me. I know the telepathy came from the piece of the astral plane I carried inside me. How? Why? How did it get there? But whenever I astral punched, it never came from my head. It came from my hands. So just to check. Huh, well, neat. My astral punching ability is intact. Only the beginning. So does that mean that while she's no longer telepathic, because she's not, and her link to Omen is severed, the whole reason I had any psychic ability in the first place was because I had taken a piece of the astral plane into me during the Lazarus reigns. In order to send Johnny back to the subtle realms though, I had to take out that energy and astral punch him with it. Power Girl is still punching her way into this astral plane and just free floating around it and able to navigate it without telepathic abilities? Or is she punching into alternate realities and she's always been punching into alternate realities? If so, what does that mean for the people whose heads she was punching around in? What was really happening during those therapy sessions? Was she actually punching and removing stuff and tossing it out into the multiverse? Were bits of the source code parts of their canon history and they were being moved around? Is this like when Superboy Prime punched reality, erased Hal's DUI and brought Jason back to life? And actually also altered Power Girl's history, so there's a link there. Is Power Girl about to punch her way around the DC universe, changing people's histories? I'd read that probably. I'd read most Power Girl things. What does that mean for her punching her own trauma? Because she left the world-ending battle mid-fight to have a shower and regroup. Yes, that happened. Self-care, even while Johnny Sorrow was trying to take over the world. Even though in earlier panels she cried about people potentially dying because of her, but there's still time for a shower. But seriously, did she punch her own trauma out of reality? This is a moment where the connection could have been made more clear, because there is a lot left open to interpretation that could be read multiple ways. Now, some may think it's super obvious, super clear, but there are a couple of ways this could be interpreted. Is your interpretation the correct one? We'll have to see. Time of recording. Now, speaking of Johnny Sorrow, Sorrow never truly feels menacing in this story. Nothing happening feels urgent, and it should. The world is potentially ending. People are potentially dying. Other heroes are trapped in psychic dreamscapes. It's up to Power Girl and Omen. But that whole are they gonna make it? Can they save the world? That pressure, that excitement, it never materializes. And at times, because of the lack of backgrounds and construction of panel flow, it can even be difficult to follow where the characters are. And the narration boxes do little to combat that, with either location notes or editor's notes to reference past events, or even when this is taking place in the dawn of DC canon, which is a small detail that the backup story does, which ends up helping you understand and situate the characters. At one point when Johnny's trying to woo Power Girl, she asks, "Where are we?" And that is a question I very much seconded. Where are we? A place where you can no longer abuse my poor henchman. I'm a much more alluring target to exercise your devils upon anyway. I've never experienced my own anguish mirrored in a manner so agonizingly pristine until you. I tuned into you every day until one day something changed. I could hear you no longer. Dreadful silence in an instant. You were my tether, my anchor. When I lost access to you, I began attempting to tunnel forward into Earth Prime through the minds of people around you. I was casting my presence out like psychic pappus seeds drifting, hopeful in the wind, and praying enough of me could take root until I was able to grow forward through them like a ghost in the machine, which I did. Okay, So was he the trauma, or was he just the little hints that he was leaving, like how he was in the Rose Garden, like Detroit Become Human in Supergirl's mind? Again, this is a moment that could have actually warranted from either a flashback to some of the prior backup stories, because not everybody would have read them, or just a bit more information for clarification, because it's such a big thing. This is his big villain monologue. This is the reveal. This is a moment for pedantic details. And yet this is a moment where they're not there. All you have to do is come back with me to Earth 2. We're destined, sweet girl. You and I, dear Paige, are the last 2 remaining survivors of a fallen world. Return with me to Earth 2. I mean, is that accurate? The last 2 survivors? Now? I don't know, Johnny. Once I leave Earth Prime, my horsemen and henchmen alike will follow. All you have to do to save everyone is simply say yes. You're forgetting something, Johnny. And what is that? I've already watched you play this exact game once before with Stargirl. You and I are the same, Power Girl. Oh my God, we're the same, you and I! Stepping into Vampire Hal Jordan's playbook. Why does Johnny Sorrow have 6 fingers here? Why? You see, this is why he's wrong. Clearly they are not the same. Speaking of visual things, why did Stargirl briefly appear on the other panel as a visual reference? It was unnecessary, and also why does she have glasses? Courtney doesn't have glasses. A lot of this feels like it's meant to be an emotive piece, dealing with overall themes of grief and sadness. Grief is the void left behind after something you once loved was violently ripped away. Grief is what happens in love's absence. Love is when your cup runneth over, but grief is a hollow chasm. There is no negotiating with grief. It does what it wants. You will never outgrow or outrun it. It can't be reasoned with, it can't be bargained with, and it will not stop until you are dead. Okay, jokes aside, there's nothing wrong with exploring some of these more emotive elements or having a work that's more thematic in tone, but to have that paired with the type of action-adventure story that requires some more minute details creates a bit of a mishmash. And it results in the concept not being coherently articulated. It's these emotional beats that take up most of the story, and while there are some interesting moments of imagery of her talking to, say, Kal-El, but when it comes to the danger portion of the story, defeating Johnny Sorrow and saving the world, that's 4 pages. That's for the climax. There are a couple more action panels throughout, but they are punctuated quite thoroughly with the emotional beats, so lose urgency. The world-ending threat, he's done in 1, and it's even said that Catwoman took out one of these all-powerful psychic horsemen on her own, the Washoe Theater in Anaconda, Montana, one of the last remaining Art Deco theaters in the US, and where Johnny brought us in his earlier psychic projection. Is that where it was? Because it wasn't indicated. This whole scene setup, there's some resemblance to Stargirl and the Shade Theater scene, where Stripesy and Barbara Whitmore come upon an injured and seemingly dying Shade in their local movie theater.
So I've been forced to preserve what power I have left sitting here in the dark. You see, you know, this is a wonderful film. It's even better the 7th time.
That scene was also meant as an emotional climactic moment. I think it worked better there though, but miles will vary.
No, Barbara. Please. No threats. Make no mistake, I still have enough power to kill you both where you stand.
Then kill me. Because I don't want to live without my daughter.
Now the ending moment here, the climax between him and Power Girl is odd. I thought that if I got out, that if I forced roots down, forced a real connection to someone, somewhere else, that you could belong. Yes, I've always longed for belonging. Kiss, kissing him on the cheek, connective kiss, sympathy kiss, pity kiss. You're sweet. I'm really not. Pow, punch, emotional punch to the face, emotional damage. What is the intent of this scene, specifically the kiss being integrated into it? Because this scene really could have been done without that. She could even have listened to him speak and still punched him out into another realm and not kissed him. What is the kiss adding? The way it's drawn, it looks like they're having a moment. And even if she has had this cathartic moment where she understands him, why is it manifesting in kiss form rather than in, say, a discussion or some other kind of connective moment? Yes, there can be a kiss there, but why the kiss? Power Girl is no stranger to having to shut down people who are into her, but this is not that. Not often I see Power Girl admit something hurts, always putting on a brave face, trying to prove herself to the world, show she's the toughest broad around. Grand? Yeah. Get any closer and I break your wrist. Just punch him into the void. Also, can she control where in the void she's sending him? This comic is a bit of a mess. It has confusing / convoluted explanations of powers and motivations. It relies on the reader bonding more with themes or with the generic emotional traumas on display, feelings of displacement or grief, and this superseding rather than complementing the main narrative, almost competing at points, even though there are ways to mesh them quite well. Because while some may feel they match, there are a lot of reasons for many readers to feel they don't. At the end, it becomes more of a theme and emotions first, first over the story itself. The narrative order and flow definitely takes a back seat. It feels almost like an art house piece in how it's presented, which would work if that had overtly been how this had been pitched. The overall tone lacks urgency for what is meant to be a climactic battle, an ending to this arc, or just a big showdown with a villain like Johnny Sorrow. The lovely serene art doesn't at times match the horrific elements that are meant to be shown. There are questions as to how much and which canon is or isn't in play, and things apply when they need to for this plot, but not at all points where they would make sense. Even within the flow of this own story itself, it stops at many points and it throws off the pacing that there is. It's hard to gauge where characters are physically or how time is moving, and all of these elements end up piling up on top of each other. While on their own, one or two things could potentially be overlooked, this all ends up piling up into a giant tangled ball. That is, of course, if one notices or feels some of these things. Again, some may not. Or some may notice, but the strength of the things they're enjoying, which is largely the emotional beats or the satisfaction perhaps of seeing Power Girl connect with the Superfamily, that may override all of those prior complaints. Again, as mentioned many times, mileage is going to vary. But the core idea of the story is cool, and with just some tweaks to the presentation, it could have come across a lot stronger. Power Girl, who has these new powers, has been trying to help people in a new way, and in the process she's drawn the attention of one of her old enemies. The whole him trying to seduce her didn't need to be a thing. Not really, because in a way it's distracting from all of her pre-existing emotional drama that has been built up in this series. Instead, it could have tied into this idea of her not belonging. Treat it like here's another cast-off come to take her away or ruin this new world, making her feel even more like she shouldn't be part of it. Scale down the threat a bit because there's not time to build to that level, not the whole world-ending climax thing. Instead of the whole world being threatened, just Metropolis. And then again, the focus can stay on the Superfam since that's the direction this run is pulling. No Horsemen, since they were so easily defeated, ends up making them feel redundant and not like much of a threat. Instead, longer could have been spent in Johnny's realm, which was also where some of the stronger jokes were, and would line up with the rest of the issues because the majority of them took place in this astral space, which would also have been the ideal space to explain how her powers worked. Plus, her visions could still occur in that space, since it is a psychic one. And you don't have to break up the action by, say, having her stop to read Supergirl's journal, which she does. Power Girl is a lesser version of me. That's how she sees herself, but I have never once thought that about her. I view her as an extension of my soul. I think we share a bond that no one else in this world could possibly conceive of, and I wish she saw it that way too. I am not her adversary nor her competition. We are something beyond family, and we should be close. But instead, we're like opposite ends of a magnet. I know that she would never invade my privacy by, say, reading my journal. Basically, the story just needed some tighter editing and some cleaning up. Just some focusing, and a bit more decisive choices as to which earthly references were going to be in play, and omitting some and the ones that contradict. Especially the ones that don't seem to match what this run is going for with Power Girl. If one is going to shift the tone of a character, one really needs to commit and make sure all the dominoes are in place to make sure that this characterization can be the strongest that it can be. Even if one likes this new characterization, the emotional direction, her name change, all of it, it could have been presented in a stronger manner. It just could have been a better constructed and stronger story. There are cool ideas here. Yes, it is a different direction for the character, and for some that's gonna rankle, and especially it can be disconcerting when at the same time this is going on, you have, say, the new Golden Age written by Jeff Johns, who has written Power Girl for a long time, so she feels more in line with the characterization more may be familiar with, which while the Omniverse may be in play, for the average person, they're more used to having that more connected universe. It's one of the strengths and one of the things that many people enjoy. Not everyone, but many. But who knows what the future holds, although I know what it holds for me. More videos and some very interesting comments from all of you down below. Because all of those are just my thoughts and I want to hear yours. Give them to me down below. Share. Do you disagree? Do you think this was well done? Do you like it more loose? Do those type of references work for you? Am I just too smooth-brained to understand the depth of what was happening? Jokes aside, if you do feel that it was very simple to understand, put that down there too. I want to hear it all. I almost said baby. I want to hear it all, baby. Just put it down below. And while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking this Friday to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.